Great. I'll speak right into it there. It is April 12th, 9:30 a.m., and you are at panel 4166, Afghanistan, an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. And we have a great panel this morning. I'm going to assume that you have read their bios and just talk for a minute or so about them so you can hear from them about their experience. But they have a lot of experience. First, just to run through, if you haven't been to this on a regular basis, we start off with about 10 minutes each from each of our panelists. And then the panelists may address each other's topics a little bit and talk, and then we open it up for questions. So most of the hour and 20 minutes is open for questions from you. We hope to get questions from many of you. Remember to keep it questions. If you get into a big statement, we'll get my great producer back here, Bob McClendon, to come give you the hook. But our panelists today are Ike Wilson, Phil Walker, and Sarah Holowinski. And they come, as I say, with lots of experience in Afghanistan. This is their third panel here at Conference on World Affairs together. And one of the great things about CWA is that it brings people together, because I think these three did not know each other before, but they've said that they do plan to stay in touch because they work on so many similar issues. They've kind of called themselves the Three Amigos here after the week that they've put together.
Or Three Stooges.
Yeah, we may be the Three Stooges by the end.
I was trying to leave that one alone, guys. Yeah, that's right.
No, that just means you're Mo.
I think you're Curly. Yeah.
Mo, Larry, Curly.
Yeah, that's Curly, that's right. Well, we're going to let Curly kick it off this morning. And I guess the biggest news, since I think is the change in the bio, is that Colonel Ike Wilson has been promoted to Colonel, and which is a great thing. And yeah. Ike Wilson is on faculty at West Point now. He's head of the Division of American Politics, Policy, and Strategy. And he was also on, has had tours of duty in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and has been in charge of troops in conflict areas all over the world. He'll be followed by Phil Walker. Phil is an attorney and is counsel to, as your bio said, the Afghan Ministry of Finance. What it didn't say is that before that he was counsel to the Afghan Foreign Affairs Ministry. He has a number of years of experience in Afghanistan, including 9 months there last year, 6 months in Afghanistan the year before. We've spent most of the year of 2007 in Afghanistan. So lots of experience. And finally, batting cleanup on this one is Sarah Holowinski, who is the executive director for the campaign for innocent victims in conflict, or CIVIC, and has traveled to conflict areas all over the world protecting victims, including Afghanistan. So I will start off with Ike Wilson. Please turn off your cell phones, and thanks for coming.
Well, good morning, everyone. I usually like to swing cleanup at these things. And one of the main reasons I like to do so is because I think it's a good symbol when you have the military following, supporting, kind of last resort, last word, if they get word anyway. And so, but I've been getting away with that so far at this conference, and I thought it was, on the one hand, my fair comeuppance to actually had the pressure of kicking it off. But also, it's actually emblematic as I think about it. It's illustrative of probably what one of my main offerings of one of the main problems with our approach, with the U.S. and the international community approach to the puzzle that is Afghanistan, is that we've actually seen the military lead and frame the enterprise or enterprises, the puzzles that are in and around Afghanistan. So it's probably illustratively appropriate for the military to go, because it gives you an idea right off the bat that where some of the problems may have, the original seed corn for the problems that we're actually witnessing today. This is a tough panel. I was here, last time I talked on Afghanistan here, I think was in 2010. And this was right after my more recent trip, my latest trip to Afghanistan in '09. I was called over right after the president had made his March 27 remarks. which basically laid out the new strategy, the U.S. strategy for Afghanistan, Pakistan. In those remarks, he laid out what has been since that time, the guiding strategic aims for the war, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But after that, right after that, about a week or two later, I was Sunday at home watching the news programs, probably like a lot of us do, and the phone rang. And quick lesson: never pick up your phone on a Sunday morning. So I picked up the phone, and it was literally Afghanistan calling. It was the joint what we call J5, the Joint Operational Planning Staff, and they had seen some of the work I had suffered through in terms of coming up with integrated civil-military solutions to these types of compound civil-military type of interventions in Iraq, and some of the work I'd done in Iraq. And so they had looked at the statements that the president had put out, and they called and said, "Hey, can you come over?" And in the military, when you get an invitation, it's a directive. So I paused for 1 millimeter and said, "Yeah, when do I have to be there and for how long?" But they were having trouble getting all the players together. So they went down the laundry list of all the players. And the one player that they left off, which I raised, was, well, what about the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan? They're the one on the list that we haven't mentioned. He said, "Yeah, can you come on over?" And so I went over, and I had the opportunity to work actually kind of as a professor without portfolio, which can be a very empowering position to be in, because you're not in a chain of command with any of the leadership, either civilian or military, and so you can actually talk and speak really bluntly with the leadership. And so that's what I did for about 4 months, working between Ambassador Eikenberry's office as chief of mission at the time, and General McChrystal, who was just coming on board as the new commander ISAF. So I spent my time basically operationalizing, as we call it in the military, formalizing for implementation the president's March 27 remarks. We've actually been working off of that plan, that broad plan, since summer of 2009. So that's kind of the context that brings me to you today. What I wanted to do with the rest of my time is just kind of share with you some of my puzzles and struggles, some of the questions that have plagued me both as a student of Afghanistan, going far beyond the war, which is in its 11th year. Not an 11-year campaign, but 11 years of 1 year starts in feeble stops. So it's not like we have an 11-year campaign. We're in the 11th year of 1 year actions. And that's a large part of the problems. That's one of my major concerns, that we've been actioning a lot of things, and actually at a level of analysis where you're looking at the good or not so good works on the ground, whether it's the Afghan people themselves, or the 2,500 plus non-governmental organization and operators spanning across the entire spectrum of humanitarian assistance communities, or the military, including well beyond the U.S., but including upwards of 47 NATO and other troop contributing nations. You can measure those efforts, and they should be measured in part based on the context of the work. And so we're getting some very good things done on behalf of a future of, by, and for the Afghan people on the ground. But when you look at this and do an analysis and an assessment and measure the overall campaign at a strategic level, it begs some really important first principle level questions. We've been doing a lot of things. We've been addressing and answering the question of how. How do we do this? How do we not do this? How do we do this better? Again, with adjustments by one year increments. But what we have not yet done, if we think about it together, and I hope we have a chance in the Q&A to really kind of dig deep into this with the Q&A, we really haven't asked and answered the question of why and for what. All right, and if you all have talked to me before, one of my big shticks is, there's a really important thing about war and peace, and particularly to a constitution of a democratic republic, and that is the declaratory function of the republic. You have to declare wars, else you may find yourself using force and find yourself 11 years after the fact saying, wow, we've been in war, right? And we're not really sure why and how. We're not really sure how we got here and where we're going. It's hard to measure. It's hard to even, in that context, tell whether you've actually passed through as a nation leading a community of able and willing coalition partners. It's hard to tell whether we've actually together passed through 1, 2, maybe even 3 moments of success. Call it a day. You've actually met your strategic aim as articulated by the National Command Authority representing you, the nation, and all the contributing nations. I actually think we passed through at least 2 periods where we had actually set conditions such that we could have legitimately said that a condition-based situation is such that we can actually begin to withdraw based on positive returns of the campaign, measured against the stated strategic aim. But it's hard to tell whether you're progressing or regressing. It's hard to tell whether you're succeeding or failing when you haven't set the metrics from the beginning. And that's why declaring things begun and finished are very important, particularly for democratic republics. So I'm just going to, at this point, just kind of give you a scatter plot of some concerns and some issues. And hopefully that'll be enough to spark some conversation. First of all, remember at the beginning of this, this was considered, and I think justifiably so, Afghanistan from the U.S. perspective was the good war and the necessary one. In fact, President Obama, as late as 2009, declared it as such. Iraq was our bad war, our unnecessary war, our war of choice. Afghanistan was the good war. And we understand instinctively, particularly as Americans, why that was the case. We had actionable intelligence and a reliable intelligence that the assault on not just the U.S., but primarily the U.S., but really as an attack of 9/11 was on the U.S., it was really an attack on, as the Article 5 response from the NATO members, an attack on one is an attack on all, right? We were able to pinpoint the center of gravity, if you will, ground zero, if you will, of the assault coming from this region, supported by safe haven and sanctuary given by the Taliban-led Afghanistan government. And so this was a defensive war. This was a reactionary war. And if we recall, if we were able to reflect back to 2001, it was a very measured response, relatively speaking. And that success came to a conclusion, meeting those aims, disrupting al-Qaeda, dislodging the Taliban from the mechanisms of government control in Afghanistan by December of 2002, with a pretty fleet force of special operation forces, both on the military side and the civilian side, with multiple agencies participating, married with precision-guided munitions, and marrying that with indigenous ground forces. Very fleet, agile, effective force that met that first measure. So in some cases, that first war was declared, frankly, by the Taliban and bin Laden, and we responded. That war declared itself on us, and we succeeded in that war, if you will, that war policy, as early as November, December of 2002. Then things went kind of awry. We turned our attention at the moment where you should be, as a nation, and particularly as a military, consolidating and reorganizing on the objective. We did not do that in Afghanistan. We did not reinforce the success of the major combat operations with a plan for reconstruction, stabilization, and transition. We turned our attention and all of our resources to Iraq, the perhaps not so necessary war. And that really left Afghanistan kind of in a dangerous hiatus, which gave the Taliban and other affiliated organizations this insurgency, this hydra-headed insurgency, it gave it an opportunity to rise up and declare a situation for a declaration, a non-declaration, but a declaration through action of the next round of the war. And that's kind of how this thing has been stumbling along for 1-year increments over an 11-year time period. But the question of where did the so-called good and necessary war go so bad and when? Well, that's one of the marker moments that I would offer that we need to go back and reflect on as we are at the moment today of determining whether or not the withdrawal, which is happening, it is happening. It's not going to not happen. We are going to be dramatically downsized in terms of both the civilian and military forces involved in the Afghanistan affair by 2014, if not earlier, by the will of our own and equally by the will of the Afghan government and the people. How am I doing? 10 minutes. Oh, really? Okay, great.
You're okay.
Oh, I'm
Keep
doing
going.
okay, all right.
I'm not picking you.
I'm about to read. I haven't given my disclaimer, and I'm going to get in trouble today because I'm wearing black because all my panels are very dangerous today. I'm talking it's Afghanistan, right? And I go from here to the religion and politics, third wire, right? And then this afternoon I'm talking about Pakistan. So I decided to wear black just to kind of get in the mood. But I have to give the disclaimer, I am an active duty military officer, and so I'm talking to you all as a citizen. I'm talking to you as your military. I will answer your questions forthrightly. So if there's something that I can't answer, I will tell you, and I'll try to give you a quick explanation of why I cannot. And it's probably because it's an operational security issue, or it's a kind of question that you really don't want to draw a military member over into, because it's probably going to speak to partisan politics and ideology, and you really don't want your military in that ground anyway. So, but other than that, it's all game, and I'm here to heighten our awareness of where we've been and why we are where we are with Afghanistan. Okay, so those are the preambles. Some other things that are worrisome to me. So we have the problem with not really knowing why we're there and for what, and it's very difficult to determine when you've won or not, or on the regressive end of your campaign strategy when you haven't set the parameters up front. So declaring things is very important. The other thing I want to talk about is from the two things. I want to kind of poll the audience. Of course, Afghanistan, from the military perspective, from the political military perspective, we call this an insurgency, and so we have been talking about and approaching this hydra-headed puzzle from the standpoint of counterinsurgency, or COIN, and everyone's familiar with that, right? If I ask you all, maybe to shout it out, in this kind of war that we've been in for 11 years in Afghanistan, who is the principal COIN agent? COIN, who's the lead? When I say COIN, who's the lead operator, the lead of a counterinsurgency effort? NATO. I'm hearing NATO. Who else? What else? Any other ideas? The United States. Any other ideas? Al-Qaeda? Who said the people? Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. By the nature of these wars, the answer that is always given when I ask this question is usually the U.S. or the coalition. That is not the case. These kinds of wars are not our wars. We are the external foreign patron in these kinds of wars, either to the government, that because it's a counterinsurgency situation, that tells us right off the bat that if we are, as the external patron, are siding with the government, we are already starting in a deficit, a legitimacy deficit. Because the reason why you have an insurgency is because of some real or perceived, or a mix of the two, loss of legitimacy on the part of the state, of the government, the indigenous host government, therefore the rising up with arms to depose that government. So we're already in this initial game of setting the teams for this battle, for this gameplay, we're already on the losing side from the get-go, from the beginning. It's very dangerous when we think that we are the principal, when we're only the agent. And it's very important for us to understand that when we certainly have interest in this war, but the war itself is theirs, right? And that's we really haven't come to terms with that. Here's the other one. So since it's their war, so it's the government of Iraq, or of Afghanistan, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan's war, and therefore their people's war. If I ask you what the number one issue of concern among Afghans based on the latest, most reliable polls in Afghanistan is, what do you think that is? What's the number one? Security? Civilian casualties. Someone said corruption. Corruption's number one. Corruption's number one. Corruption of government. Unresponsive, non-transparent government. More specifically, when you dig deeper into the polls and the poll questions, it is just like here. We love our congresspersons, we tend to hate Congress, right? There's an affinity. All politics is local, and in kin-based societies, clan-based societies, It's very local. It's familial, right? And so positive returns if you ask an Afghan about their affinity with their local tribe and the local tribal and clan leaders. But you're talking about really high number one concerns with the national government, I would offer, and this is provocation of my own, that probably one of the most corrupt problems and concerns among a majority of Afghans is the concept and the idea of a strong national government. The place has never had it. But if you look at our strategy, I'm using the term lightly, it's very keyed off of building up and strengthening national governance and national security force capability. That itself could put us even further on the line, which is anathema to what the majority of the population actually sees as right moves forward. See how this thing starts to unravel itself? I'm doing bad now, right? Like 2 more minutes?
Yeah, a couple more minutes.
Okay, so that's enough to lay on the table in terms of some of the concerns. You can see how this thing gets into derailment zone quite quickly. Quick anecdotes. How do we know? How can we tell that this thing is where we are today is really starting to unravel? And I would offer, and I don't have to tell you. I'm just going to raise it, and you already know these things. When you start to see soldiers, our own U.S. and NATO soldiers, urinating on corpses, right? Unblinkingly. When you start to see mistakes or maybe not, sins of omission or commission in terms of the improper handling in disposal of Islamic religious articles, right? Over there and here at home, right? Frankly, when you see the printing of King James Bible in Dari and in Pashto, in the transmission and delivery of these articles through the chaplaincy and through the soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan, those are indicators that Houston, we may have a problem here, in an 11-year-long one, right? When you start seeing officers, not just soldiers, but the officers, U.S., NATO, British, being shot and killed through what we're calling green on blue attacks from within, through the ministries, attacks from the Afghan National Security Forces, partners, attacks from within. This is a sign that things are starting to unravel at a more precipitous rate. My concerns, and I'm going to end here, what's next? We're building down and out, right? We have economic austerity. The defense's budgets particularly are building down, and your military services, particularly the Army, is building down and out of these kinds of wars. We're on the path of doing the same thing we did in the wake of Vietnam. Your military, particularly Army, does not like doing these what we call these dirty little wars of insurgency and counterinsurgency. We like doing the World War II mechanized type of warfare. And so we're building ourselves out of this. So if there is a need to continue, most scholars and practitioners say that the next 25 to 50, maybe the next century of warfare will be more of these kinds of wars. So we're building ourselves out. And I think the political will is right behind that. It's an interesting thing to think about if those kind of wars are going to be determining themselves on us increasingly in the future, whether we're building ourselves out of that, how that's going to leave the nation and the community after that. We're saying no more Afghanistans, and we're building out of these things. Books to read: Stephen Tanner's Afghanistan, right? Rory Stewart's The Places in Between. Sarah Shays, I cannot remember the name of her book, but you just Google Sarah Shays, and her and Roy's book give you an insight on the human dimension of Afghanistan. Bob Woodward's, if you want to get a sense of this disconnect between the civilian masters who declare and define the war aims and the military generals that may or may not intendedly get ahead of or behind those aims, Bob Woodward's work, Obama's Wars. And then Soldier Accounts, Restrepo, and The Unforgiving Minute by Craig Mullaney. So thanks. I hope that's enough on the table to get some good questions going.
Thank you, Ike. And actually, talk about derailment.
as you made your presentation, you started giving me ideas for my own that I've tried to work into my, my 8 minutes or my 10 minutes. Including one or two things we disagree on, believe it or not.
Oh,
Finally.
Finally.
Thank you all for coming this morning. This is a topic that is very important to me, actually. Afghanistan has been the prime focus of my professional life for several years now. First, I was there in 2007 as an advisor with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then I went back early 2010 as senior counsel to the Ministry of Finance. And all I can say is that working at the senior level of the government of Afghanistan is a fascinating experience. The term carnival ride comes immediately to mind. Over these past 2 years, what I've been working on is run the gamut from, very high stakes negotiations with our international partners to playing bad cop with recalcitrant contractors who aren't doing what their contract tells them that they should do. And I have to say, at a certain level, I love playing bad cop. All right, to the main question. What's next for Afghanistan? Peace, continued conflict, something else? I think we need to start by talking about what the ongoing objectives are for the United States. And while I'm focusing on the United States, first, I'm an American. We're all American, mostly Americans in this room. And there is a major question facing the United States of what will be the nature of its continuing engagement in Afghanistan after 2014. And I think we just need to put right out on the table, what are some of the issues at stake? One issue is it is important that Afghanistan not revert to being a safe haven for terrorism after the withdrawal of the bulk of U.S. forces. Second, there is a serious possibility post-2014 that Afghanistan will become, for lack of a better term, a narco-state, possibly even the premier narco-state in the world. We can talk about that a little bit later. One point that's often overlooked and I think is worth mentioning is that I believe, at least, that a success in Afghanistan, and when I say success, I mean some semblance of stability, continued economic growth, and a government that is capable of sort of running the country, is that it can be a source for regional stability rather than regional instability, which it has been for many years now. Let's not forget that the big game in that neighborhood is the rivalry between Pakistan and India, and that Afghanistan has, in some respects, been the proxy war between Pakistan and India for a number of years now. And success, however we define it, in Afghanistan does have an impact on that rivalry, and can actually be the proving ground for improved relations between those two regional giants. And also, in many ways, Afghanistan holds the keys to economic prosperity for that part of Asia, because it sits astride the Silk Road, both east-west and north-south. And the economic possibilities for regional growth are actually tremendous if we can get the pieces lined up in the right way. If I could just skip back to what I've been up to the last couple of years, two things that I've been up to that I'm willing to talk about. I'm not going to work them into the presentation, but I know they've been in the New York Times and other major papers quite a bit. Is number one, Kabul Bank. Number two, negotiations with the IMF. I was deeply involved with the IMF negotiations, and we did sign an agreement with the IMF last November, which we're now trying to implement. And also Kabul Bank, the Kabul Bank collapse, which was the largest bank in the history of Afghanistan and the largest bank collapse in the history of Afghanistan. Back in September 2010, I was on vacation in England, and I read the paper about this, the run on the bank, the allegations of hundreds of millions of dollars stolen, and I thought, oh boy, I know what I'm doing for the next couple of months at least. So back to what's next. Transition. transition is going to happen. Transition is the term that the U.S. military and increasingly the government of Afghanistan is using to talk about what is happening right now as U.S. forces, which had a substantial buildup in 2009, 2010, are starting to draw down, such that U.S. and international forces will be substantially out of the country by 2014. There will be some residual role for U.S. and other forces. We're not quite sure as yet what that role will be, probably in some training and support capacities. That's still an issue under negotiation. In addition to the military transition is also the civilian transition as the ISAF forces hand off a lot of civilian responsibilities in the areas where those responsibilities were actually delivered by ISAF to the government of Afghanistan, and which raises the question both of, does the government of Afghanistan have the ability to take on the security responsibility that is being handed to it, and also does it have the capacity to take on the civilian and support requirements that are being handed to it progressively over time. I am, in fact, cautiously optimistic about Afghanistan if the United States and the NATO partners play the game well over the next couple of years. But mind you, carnival ride. Carnival ride. That's the term to remember. Anything can happen. So when I'm cautiously optimistic, I'm very cautiously optimistic. First question, security. Can the Afghan National Army take on the security responsibilities that are being passed to it at the present time? I'm not a military guy. I don't really have inside knowledge of this. What people who seem to know what they're talking about tell me is that the Afghan National Army probably can take on this responsibility. The Afghan National Army has been growing rapidly over the past 2 years, possibly even too rapidly, and this is something we can come back to and discuss. But when I've seen the Afghan National Army in action, they seem to be able to function. They seem to be able to hold together. Experts that do work with the ANA tell me that some of the units are functioning well, others are functioning less well. Commonly, it's the older, more proven units that are holding up better than the recently conscripted or recently pulled in units. Part of this whole debate about whether the ANA can hold is the size of the Afghan National Army going forward. And this has been a debate between the government of Afghanistan and ISAF, principally the United States, because the United States is probably going to have to foot the bill. And the Afghans are looking for larger armed forces, whereas the United States and the ISAF partners are looking for a somewhat smaller Afghan National Army. Of course, a less expensive Afghan National Army. I understand that an agreement was reached within the last couple of days. I don't know if the I's have been dotted and the T's crossed, but I understand an agreement was reached in principle on a smaller figure for the Afghan National Army, but that the door would be left open to further expansions of the Afghan National Army with the concomitant financial support if it is deemed necessary on the ground at the time, which is probably a pretty reasonable approach. Second issue, money. In fact, in some ways, I'm more worried about the money issue than I am worried about the security issue. Maybe that's because I'm closer to the money issue than the security issue. The government of Afghanistan has made tremendous strides in the last couple of years in both growing the economy and developing the national resources that would allow it to be substantially self-sustaining in the long haul. But they are nowhere near ready to take on the financial burden both of a 250,000-man Afghan National Army and also the development agenda that it has set for itself and that its international partners have set for it. Can't happen. No way, no how. The fiscal gap, when I say the fiscal gap, I mean the gap between what comes in and what goes out, is quite substantial. And we don't see that gap narrowing for a number of years yet. Realistically, Afghanistan is not going to be financially self-sustaining no less than 10 years, no more than 18 years. Now, that's a pretty wide gap. The President Karzai, tends to go with the 10-year figure, probably because it sounds a lot better than the 18-year figure. The Minister of Finance, my direct boss, tends to go with the 18-year figure because he's the one that actually has to figure out how to pay for all of this stuff, so he goes with the more conservative number. What we're looking at is, well, by Afghan numbers, approximately $8 billion per year for at least the first few years, declining over time down to zero, no less than 10 years, no more than 18 years. The World Bank numbers come in closer to ours. The American numbers are closer to $4 or $5 billion, and part of that big difference is actually the size of the Afghan armed forces. So with this new agreement with a somewhat smaller Afghan armed forces, we actually might see that fiscal gap number coming down a bit. Although I do think that we absolutely need to be realistic on what it's going to cost to keep Afghanistan from collapsing. And make no mistake about it, without continued financial support for the next 10 years at least, Afghanistan will probably collapse. It's not going to be the security issues, it's going to be the financial issues. And a second point on these financial issues, and this is something I wanted to tie back into what Ike was saying, the government of Afghanistan was left out of a lot of the ISAF calculations up until, I would say, about 2009, 2010, and this may well be Ike's benign influence, that the Afghan government actually needs to be involved in negotiations and discussions about transition to a better, brighter future. And it was in 2009, 2010 timeframe that the government of Afghanistan was brought into those calculations, and that support was given to the government of Afghanistan to actually enable it to be a player at the table and start making serious contributions to planning for the longer-term future. And one extremely important point is, if there is an international commitment to the $6 billion a year, $8 billion a year, whatever it is, those funds need primarily to go through government of Afghanistan national institutions, not through private contractors working outside of the government of Afghanistan system, because that is far more expensive and also not sustainable, because you're not building capacity on the ground that will remain after the money dries up. And we can talk about that more. I'm sure the first question to your mind when we get to that is corruption, and I'm happy to talk about corruption and to talk about the measures that have been taken to make sure that if funds go through the government of Afghanistan, as they have been for a number of years now, that money goes to where it is supposed to go and does not go to where it is not supposed to go. Last I want to talk about, a final point on the money is, why is there such a big gap between the 10 years and the 18-year time frame? And this is, there's a number of variables at play here. And these variables not only relate to the financial issues, they relate to security issues, they relate to transition issues. In fact, they're all pretty much the big questions. The first is peace talks. There have been on and off peace talks with the Taliban for a while now. Currently they're off, but they might be on again soon. In fact, I do not know it, but I strongly suspect that the peace talks actually have continued despite the fact that they've publicly been shut down. And if there is the possibility of a peace deal with the Taliban or some elements of the Taliban, that could substantially change the security calculus going forward. Second, mineral resources. Afghanistan has substantial proven mineral resources that could transform the economy of Afghanistan and transform the economy of the region in the out years. And unfortunately, as news of these mineral riches have leaked out into the media, it has created, I think, an unrealistic expectation in a lot of quarters. Oh, phew, we're not going to need to pay for this place for the next decade. That's not going to happen. Those mineral resources are there. The money is starting to come into the government of Afghanistan. It does play a role in our calculations, but anybody who with experience in the mining sector will tell you it takes a heck of a long time to get these resources to pay. There are engineering challenges, there are security challenges, there's infrastructure and transportation challenges. It's going to be years before we see the real benefit. And also, we're talking about complex negotiations leading to extraordinarily complex contracts with major multinational corporations to actually exploit these reserves, and these take time to do right. And there is a real danger that if these resources are not handled well and wisely in a transparent manner, that they can actually undermine stability rather than enhance stability in the long run. Has anybody ever heard the phrase blood diamonds? Yeah, think that. Third, drugs. There's a serious possibility, if we do not handle the transition right, that the drug trade is going to remain and, in fact, become more so the primary industry of Afghanistan and the primary export of Afghanistan, even more than it is now. Afghanistan is beautifully situated to be a narco state. Lack of a strong government, substantial existing drug sector, need for the resources to keep the place running if the international community does not make up that fiscal gap. The hawalas, which are the informal banking sector, which is very well developed and very sophisticated, allowing funds to be transferred all around the world without international law enforcement being able to track it or stop it or anything like that. This is a major issue and needs to be paid attention to. And then last but not least, governance. We've talked a little bit about corruption. We can talk about corruption more. One of the big challenges for Afghanistan over the next 10 years is building credible, transparent, effective governance structures. That has started to happen. And we can talk about it on a ministry-by-ministry basis. We can talk about it on an office-by-office basis. There have been some notable accomplishments in the last couple of years. There's been a couple of notable failures in the last couple of years. I'll just wrap up by saying that while things are not great in Afghanistan, there is some hope there. And in many ways, the challenges that are facing Afghanistan now are the challenges of success as much as they are the challenges of failure. The Kabul bank collapse, which I'm sure somebody will ask about, was the result of the economy outstripping the ability of the government to provide the prudent regulation of the economy that is necessary when you start to move from a post-conflict scenario into a lower income but rapidly growing state and economy where you actually have a banking sector. You actually have sophisticated international transactions going on. You actually have fairly sophisticated investments starting to take place and smart people who are well positioned to manipulate that situation to their financial advantage. You can see similar things happening in Eastern Europe in about the 8 to 10 years after the fall of communism. I recall in particular there was a massive Ponzi scheme that nearly took down the government and economy of Romania in 97, 98, something like that. Similar things happening in Bulgaria and Serbia. This is actually an indicator of success as much as it is failure. But the challenge of Afghanistan over the next 10 years is to build the structures that will allow sustained growth and not allow a collapse back to anarchy and the potential for a safe haven for terrorism, as Afghanistan was for, frankly, many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Sarah Holowinski from the Campaign for Innocent Victims in Conflict.
Hi, y'all. How are you doing? Really light topic for a morning, right? I was actually, so one of my fellow panelists on another panel saw me this morning and challenged me to bring in a discussion topic from yesterday's sex panel into this one. And I've been sitting here, I've been paying attention, but I've also been sitting here thinking about how in the world am I going to do that? I don't know that I'm going to be able to do that, but maybe that was enough. So get in a satellite with me and come up out of the United States and Afghanistan and look at the entire world. And I'm gonna look at some really broad brushstrokes and some questions that I have. And I was thinking about this panel, and I've been going to Afghanistan for about 6 years. I've been working on civilian casualties, so I have a very particular perspective about what's been accomplished in Afghanistan and what hasn't. But I was thinking about an eye for an eye and thinking about, well, this panel really could have been called an eye for an eye Afghanistan, Somalia, Pakistan, Yemen, Indonesia, right? I mean, this is not just Afghanistan. It's about what do you do when you're bombed? How do you define yourself? How do you define your reaction? What do you do when somebody takes something from you? How do you respond? But I look at an eye for an eye as it's a form of punishment, right? It's a form of, again, you take something from me, I'm going to take that very thing from you. So I don't see Afghanistan in this way. I have to say that I understood why we went in back in 2001. I got that. And I understood that the action was to make us safer, was to take out this safe haven, and that maybe it was even right to do so by force, although I've seen all of the horrendous impact that this has had on the civilian population. Now I look back with quite a lot of consternation and frustration and look at all of these billions, trillions of dollars spent, including on projects and development that really haven't worked or that have been siphoned off. I look at all of the civilian casualties that have been caused, the tremendous devastation to communities and families. I hear about and see all of our veterans coming back and the ones who don't. And perhaps most important to this conversation, I have sat with families who have young boys, and I've seen it outside of Kabul and in other places, and I've seen the anger and the tension in the eyes of these young boys. And that's the human element, and that's where we're really getting into what does an eye for an eye look like. So when I see that anger in the young boys, I say, all right, did this make us safer? Did this action in Afghanistan make us safer? And that is really the question. If it did not make us safer, how do you fight a global jihad? How do you do that? And so there are a couple different ways that I've seen to do that. One is that you go in and you bomb, right, the capital and surrounding areas, and you take out the regime like the Taliban. And then, as Ike was saying, you actually follow up and create some sort of stability instead of getting sidetracked in a place like, for example, Iraq. That may or may not have worked. There are other things that, if we're talking about fighting terrorism, there are other things that you can do, such as economic sanctions. You can have trade wars, cyber wars, political fights in the international arena. These are all things that presumably have been tried in various places, including in Afghanistan. And then it occurred to me also that I was doing that. There's another way, and I was doing some speech writing for President Clinton, former President Clinton. So it was after 2001, and he was giving 3 to 5 speeches a week, and he was really trying to define how he wanted to see the world. And he would say, well, Sarah, actually, everyone else does great Clinton imitations. I can't do it. Anyway, he would say, what I want to say here is that we can fight the bad things that we see in the world by building bridges, by making friends, by having these partnerships. And you'll remember from his presidency when he went to, for example, India, and everyone loved him, and they came out, and this was his thing. He said, give me your hand, here's my hand, we are going to create stability in this way. And so he would talk about, for example, North Korea, and he would say, well, the way to get the people of North Korea to love America and democracy and human rights, and this is simplistic, but I think you'll get the point, is to provide food aid. It is not to sanction the government so much that the people are starving. It's rather to go in and say, we are going to help you. We are going to help you become a better state. Now, whether or not that could have worked, I don't know. But that's sort of the positive aspect of what you can do. In a place like Afghanistan, I don't know that that would have worked. North Korea hasn't bombed us. The Taliban supported Al-Qaeda and Afghanistan did. So what do you do at that point? There are short-term and long-term solutions and questions here. But I also think back to some other places, current, not thinking back, Israel-Palestine. An eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. That's the thing, right? But an eye for an eye in the Israeli-Palestinian context also means that you're blinding the rest of the world. You're blinding everyone else to what the actual grievances are. What are the problems that we have here? How can we negotiate them? If you're just bombing back and forth, yes, you're blinding everyone, but you're also blinding the actual issues that are at the root cause of the tensions. And I think about World War II as well, where, after World War I, Germany was pretty brutally punished for acting out, as it were. And the people, then adopted fascism as a form of nationalism, as a form of, we're going to get our pride back. And then you get World War II. So after World War II, the international community, and particularly the US, said, all right, we learned our lesson, we're not going to do that again. And you get the Marshall Plan, which builds up Europe in order so that, again, I reach out my hand, they reach out their hand. We are going to be mutually supportive for both of our interests. We're going to build stability, and hopefully this is not going to happen again because we are helping you, you're helping us. But did the region actually need to go through the eye for an eye punishment before that? Did Dresden need to be leveled? Did all of the things that happened in Japan need to happen after the Pearl Harbor bombing? That's basically an eye for an eye. So I'm left with quite a lot of these questions, and I have to say, I'm with President Clinton. Make friends, aid, build bridges, but then what do you do if you still get bombed? Are we actually safer because of the action that we took after we were bombed? I can tell you that Afghans aren't, and they're not going to be for some time. I suspect that we aren't either. But I do think that in asking this question, it's about how we respond is directly related to our character as a nation. And so I don't have any solutions here, but I do worry that our character as a nation after these 11 years of war has taken a pretty big hit. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are some great insights, I think, on different perspectives and different issues arising in Afghanistan and around the world. We have about 25 minutes left in our programs, and we know we want to open this up to questions. Do any of you have any other comments before we open it up to questions?
Actually, I want to just highlight the only disagreement that I have found with Ike so far this week, and we've been on a couple of panels together, is about the importance of a stronger national government in Afghanistan. Because I know there's has been a hot debate about whether emphasis should be put on building regional governments versus building the central government in Afghanistan. And I think Ike, by his comments, had suggested the regions are important, and I don't discount that the regions are important, but There's some strong reasons for wanting a strong national government as well. First being capacity. Governments need to do things. And if you're going to build, it's a lot easier to build one infrastructure to do things rather than building 12 or 14 or 18 different infrastructures to do things when you have limited time, money, and human resources. Secondly, one great worry about strengthening the regions is it increases the danger of warlord control. Now, one of the great criticisms of the Karzai administration has been its willingness to get in bed with warlords for short-term political gains. But my fear was that if we allow greater regional autonomy, the warlords would have even more say than they already do. So, anyway.
Could I just real quick, I'm going to leave it to us disagreeing. I'm not going to try to work this to where we're buddies again.
We are buddies anyway.
We are buddies, but we finally have found one thing that we're kind of let's stick to the disagreement for once. A couple of points, quick points. We're talking about this building up of infrastructure in Afghanistan, but it takes on a tone of kind of their following supporting us, and it leaves a big question of whose enterprise is this, right? Do we really, from our model, from our context, a very strong national government makes perfect sense because you're getting economies of scale out of that. But again, when you look at the history of the place and the people, that structure itself, though it may come with great economies of scales from a Western liberal kind of context and a free market capitalistic type of context, from their perspective, it may be illegitimate. It may be anathema to the place. Again, where do you find legitimacy? Where does legitimacy lie? And just, here's where we'll agree to disagree. I've just found it more often than not at the highest provincial level and district and below is really where you start to find the connections. That's where you start to find the public administration systems that have a unique Afghan transparency and reliability and replicability type of factor. I guess I look at their history and it seems that you always have to have, you cannot govern Afghanistan from Kabul, but you can't govern Afghanistan without Kabul. And it's more of a minimalist state approach. When I think of the model in my own mind, it's more of a loose, early Articles of Confederation type of architecture with a very, very weak central government, national government. When I look at what we've been doing at an accelerated pace in building up the ministries and the Afghan national security forces, my concern is that we may have gotten out of pace with building up the instruments out of pace and ahead of building up the governance control mechanisms, right? And that could leave us with a very strong army but weak nation. And last provocation, I will leave and I'll stop. Phil, you had mentioned earlier about one of the things is maybe we get a stable Afghanistan actually maybe provides and transcends into a stable region. I hope so, and I think that's a solid and strong point. But I would offer the opposite. That when we look at the history of the place, it's possible that instability, a modicum of unstableness in Afghanistan, kind of like cartilage between bones, if you look at the history and consider here, that's kind of been the case. And a lot of the regional partners have shown interest, in long-term interest, in keeping Afghanistan not quite right, if you will. I wonder if a stable Afghanistan could actually bring entities like Pakistan and India, well, now we got to get back to old business, right? So I think we have to look at both of those.
Great. We have, looks like several people up here with questions already. If you have questions, we have a microphone over here and a microphone over here. Just two reminders. One is that we are asking for questions rather than statements. And the other one is, if you have a student in line behind you or someone that looks suspiciously like a student in line behind you, we ask that you please invite them to move ahead of you and move to the front of the line with the questions. Okay, we'll start off here. Steve?
I'll defer to the woman.
Okay. I'm sorry?
Speaking of the mic.
Speak into the microphone. He said he was deferring
Okay.
to
If you want to
the
go
other
first.
question here.
I just wanted to discuss the issue more about the role of the Taliban in the future government. It seems that they just can't be eliminated, and they're part of this local, kin-oriented kind of tribal government that is the tradition there. And it would seem that we would never be able to leave the government or Afghanistan, and we would end up probably sort of being a watchdog forever if we really had any aspirations to change all these things that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Bill, do you want to talk?
Sure, I'll tackle it briefly. That, you know, the role of the Taliban in a future Afghanistan is in fact something that is hotly discussed within Afghan government circles, and there's a fair bit of disagreement over it as well, between those that are willing to see some of the social gains that have been made over the past 10 years be minimized or set aside in favor of a peace deal, versus those who want to zealously defend some of those social gains. There's also an ethnic element that plays into it, that some of the former Northern Alliance members of the government are inclined to take a harder line towards the Taliban in negotiation than than President Karzai himself is. So I think the role of the Taliban in a future government, if ever, is a wide open question, and it's something that the Taliban can themselves influence by the stances that they may or may not take in their negotiating positions.
We also have to dissect the Taliban.
Yeah, who are the
Right.
Taliban?
I mean,
They
if-
are different factions.
I mean, if you talk to Afghans and you say, to be Talib, as I understand it, is to be just meaning faithful and true believer in the faith, right? So when I was there in 2009, we hadn't unpacked Taliban. We tend to mythologize and homogenize the threat in the initial unknown. We've gotten a lot better at this over the last couple of years, but you have to dissect which Taliban are we talking about here. You have some that are only traditionally, 3,000 years long interest, and at the heart of their insurgent movement is interest in command and control and getting back to equilibrium that they had before the 9/11 and the response.
And actually,
Others have international, they're affiliates of Al-Qaeda, they're affiliates of Mullah Omar's Quetta Taliban that are more, that fall more in the radar scope of the U.S. interests in terms of terrorism, of global reach concern. But some of the Taliban interests are very homegrown. Mm-hmm. I think the issue is up to the Afghan people in their society to decide how they're going to work a reconciliation. And then from our standpoint, you look at the behavior that comes out of that reconciliation. If it impacts our vital national interests, then you see us taking action again against those elements. But you got to give Afghans a chance to decide how they're going to reconcile this.
And I'd add two more points to that as well. I'm sorry to jump back in, but one is Pakistan is part of the equation. I mean, it's an open debate as to how much Pakistan has, how much influence Pakistan has over some elements of the Taliban, but expert opinion is they do have some influence over some elements of the Taliban and are using the Taliban as part of their great game with India, frankly. And then the second issue is the role of the drug trade, that increasingly some people believe that some elements of the Taliban benefit mightily from the drug trade, and this is influencing their behavior, and it may do so more and more down the road. I unfortunately don't know as much about South America as I might like to, but I think a fertile point of comparison for the future may be between Afghanistan and Colombia.
Let me just say that letting the Afghan people decide, which I also believe in, means letting Afghan men decide. So, as you may understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Well, in respect to the women of Afghanistan, I let this woman start this question
Just
answering.
speak right into the microphone, please, Steve.
With respect to the women of Afghanistan, I let this woman ask her question first. I'm one of the lucky Americans who was in Afghanistan teaching English during the Soviet invasion. So I got to see the country before all the chaos has started. You know, in my opinion, America owes Afghanistan because way before 9/11 and the Wahhabis. We haven't discussed the Wahhabis. I think we should. They broke the back of the Soviet Union. Throughout Eastern Europe, the people said if the Afghans can kick them out, and the Soviet Union had receded for the first time since 1917, we can kick them out. Now, my question to you is, because this is a question, not a statement, I've spent a long time dealing with Afghanistan. And I love the Afghan people. I could tell you lots of good stories. My feelings is that as far as where we're going from here, I remember coining during the Cold War a phrase that I made up, Tele-Jirga the jihad. I think we need to go back to the Loya Jirga.
What's your question?
And what kind of telecommunications can we bring in using the infrastructure of the Loya Jirga? And for the audience, Loya Jirga means Grand Circle of Friends. Thank you.
Okay.
Teshakor.
Who would like to answer that?
I just briefly, I think I'm in concert with all that, with the sentiment behind all of that, and it's what really all three of us have said, but I think Sarah and I spoke to it pointedly, of by and for the Afghans, right? Again, these types of interventions, these types of wars are political, but they're not our political, they're their political, right? We have interest in that, but they're not the dominant, they're not the determinative piece of this. So looking at reinforcing long-standing traditional mechanisms like the Loya Jirga tradition in the process, I think that's the kind of efforts that we should be following and supporting, not in the lead of, perhaps not unintendedly or intendedly truncating or pushing to the periphery, because again, those are the long-standing networks that have legitimacy. That's where legitimacy lies.
And I'll just add that the current Constitution does have a mechanism for calling a Loya Jirga, and it is highly likely that if there is any serious movement towards a peace deal, a Loya Jirga will be formed.
Yeah.
Sarah? I think we may have a student.
Thank you. It's been a really good panel. My question was just, how has U.S. and ISAF's definition of success or goals or victory changed, and where does that leave us today?
This is a great question because it allows me to speak to the change in strategic aim that came about in March 27th of 2009 that we've been operating off of since then. The strategic aim for the U.S. and the coalition is to defeat, dismantle, and disrupt al-Qaeda. And on June 4th of the following month, on June 4th, the National Security Council added an additional condition state to that aim. They added not only al-Qaeda, but any other affiliated terrorist organization. And that was really code for Quetta Shura Taliban, Mullah Omar's Taliban that is in Quetta, Pakistan. So you can see the aim actually changes the parameters of the intervention of the war itself. We're not talking Afghanistan, we're talking about AfPak, we're talking about Afghanistan, Pakistan. And frankly, this afternoon there's a panel on Pakistan. The scenario, if we really think about, and the issues that in terms of U.S. interests, security interests, it's really Pakistan, Afghanistan. When you look for the heart and soul of U.S. security interest that has brought us there and kept us there for 11 years, that you actually find more vital national interests, I would offer in a traditional sense, on the Pakistan side. Pakistan is non-permissive. You talk about anti-Americanism. That's the poster of it. To the point where it's unpermissive. You can't get any footprint, whether it's military or civilian, on the ground in Pakistan. So a large part of the puzzle of why we're in Afghanistan, and what justifies a presence in Afghanistan, is because it's the closest we can get to arguably maybe the more relevant issue from a U.S. perspective, and that's the concerns with what's going on in and around Pakistan. So, but that's the aim, and that's really what we've been operating off of. We went from 2009, we reconstructed all military forces in civilian forces, integrated civ-mil packages. We created what you're probably familiar with provisional reconstruction teams, district support teams, all of them married with military. So military, humanitarian, civil military packages at ground level all the way up to the national level. And really what we call population-centric COIN, counterinsurgency, embedding with the population in what I would call delivering the goods of all types, from security all the way to delivery of foodstuffs, rule of law, justice, these types of things. That's kind of been the profile. We're coming out of that because we're building down and out. And so it's going to be more of what we're seeing, special operation forces, strike missions, what we call the counterterrorism profile, use of drones and other precision-guided munitions. That's more the profile that we've been operating off of over the last 3 or 4 months, and that we're arguably going to be moving to full court press ahead.
Thanks. If we could move on to another question, that'd be great.
Mr. Walker, you've been mentioning the narco state. I was wondering what sort of investment are we seeing from the Afghan government to move away from that in the long term? And then for the other two panelists, how are the perceptions of the Afghan people affected when the U.S. forces or national forces go in and try to move away from that kind of agriculture also?
Okay. Let me just say we've got 10 minutes left. It looks like we have several more questions, so if you can keep it moving. We'd
Policies towards illicit drug trade from both the government of Afghanistan and NATO has, it's floundered, frankly. It's changed several times from strict interdiction and an eradication of crops to politely looking the other way to now yet another rethink. I'm not an expert in that area. I know that it is an issue that is going to grow in importance over time, and how it grows will partly be related to other big picture issues.
Sarah, you want to take the second piece?
Yeah, I'll take the Afghan perceptions. I mean, I don't know exactly what Afghan perceptions are about U.S. interventions in the drug trade or poppy fields, but I do know that there has been a lot over the past 30 years of efforts to get the poppies out, to stop the drug trade. They tried planting onions, they tried planting all this stuff that just didn't work. The farmers were, couldn't bring in any money, the families were starving, really frustrating stuff. And then, relatedly, I was talking with some Afghan officials in Istanbul a few weeks ago, and I said, how are the Afghans viewing the United States and U.S. forces these days? And they said, we'll give you 3 things that we think about: Haditha, Abu Ghraib, and peeing on corpses, right? And so if the security isn't there, if these events are happening, that's what gets around, not necessarily that this farmer has turned his field into pomegranates and is doing just fine.
One thing to think about with the poppy is, arguably, and I'm not an economist, so the economists should definitely beat me up on this later after the panel if I'm completely off the chart here, but maybe the international community just buys up the poppy and we silo it or destroy it, right? We're still providing the market, right? We're still providing foodstuffs in the tradition, but we just buy it, right? So.
I guess I used to be a student. Does that still count?
Yeah, I'm afraid not, but you go ahead.
But I'm a younger woman.
Yep. Okay. I think I've been a placeholder for longer than
Okay.
you have, maybe.
Yeah, maybe we should do that. Maybe we should hear 2 or 3 questions here and then ask it to our panel so we can
Well,
keep
Speed
Okay.
round. We can speed round it.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll put aside the question of is it a good war, as Ike mentioned. But a report just came out.
Speak into the microphone, please, and
An-
just
an
get to it
88
real quickly if you
An
could.
88-page report just came out saying that the higher ranks of the military have totally oversold what's happening in Afghanistan. It's nothing at all what they say things are going well, are going good. This was a lieutenant colonel, spent a year in Afghanistan,
Speak into the microphone if you could.
traveled 9,000 miles, spoke to generals and privates, and it's sort of a fraud. So I'm wondering how you would put that report into perspective from a field grade officer.
Okay, and we'll take a couple more questions here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. As a historical colonel, when you are teaching at West Point, you always look at the past and you look at the past history and what has worked and what's not worked. Russia did not work in Afghanistan after 10 long years. What made them think, all these people that are giving advice, what made them think that we would be different? Second part of the question is, I'm following the red, white, and blue, but I'm not following the green. So I feel that somehow someone's doing really well financially. And is it us? Because it ain't me. So
Okay.
those are the two questions.
Yeah.
Great, and I think you've been waiting a while too, so go ahead and give us your question, please.
Thank you. Very briefly, I am flabbergasted by the comments of this panel that it was only a couple years ago we brought the Afghan government. It was only a couple years ago we brought the Afghan government into discussions about what their future would be. That it's going to take a national army of 250,000 people to ensure security. That the average Afghan does not want a central government and does not trust Karzai and believes the central government is corrupt. All of these things are clear indications that the American version of the war is not going to be won. My question is, as Sarah's most recent point, what is going to happen when ISAF and the Americans pull out? What is going to happen to the Afghan women who are going to be forced back to where they were 10, 15 years ago?
Okay. Sarah, would you like to kick this one off?
Sure. We don't know what's going to happen to the Afghan women, and that's a real big concern, and that's part of what's going on in the peace negotiations. And there are a lot of human rights advocates and NGOs and politicians who are fighting back against this, well, we should just get security at any cost. Really difficult question, and we just don't know. We just don't know.
Okay. Other questions?
Oh, sure. To the gentleman's comments on the senior officer, the lieutenant colonel who reported out that the overreporting among the generals of success. I mean, I think I've read that report. I've been tracking it and kind of pulled into that conversation. Bottom line, a lot of what he talks about is accurate, I would offer. I mean, it's a measuring problem. It's what I talked about at the beginning of my framing comments. If you measure this thing at implementation level, you can come up with successes and less than successes. A war has to be ultimately measured at the strategic aim level, right? And so the ultimate measure has to be, you can't be based on how many schools you're building or body counts or all these kind of things. All that has to be put in the context of the large measure of whether it's moving you forward or backward, and not without losing your soul, and on behalf of the Afghan people, in this case, in terms of those strategic aims. In this case, I personally tend, and I'm not speaking to DOD, to agree with the reporting out of the lieutenant colonel. I don't agree with his method, frankly, and I've made this publicly known of how he reported it out, but I do agree with his assessment.
And the last question seems perfect for you, Phil.
Well,
It's about the money.
I'll do the money question, yeah.
In the Russian thing.
And one of the things that as a taxpayer has upset me terribly in the course of my work in Afghanistan is to see how much money the United States has spent there. And I feel much of it, if not most of it, has been wasted. And I'm just going to say that straight out. The last few years, we have spent in the neighborhood of $180 billion a year in Afghanistan. Over the course of the past 10 years, we have invested nearly $1 trillion in Afghanistan. Give or take a few 10 million is small change. And while there has absolutely been tangible progress on the ground, you see tremendous strides in infrastructure, in education, in basic health, a lot of that money has been frittered away in ill-advised schemes, in stupidly contracted executive arrangements, in out-and-out corruption. And one of the beneficial aspects of the transition is everyone, and not just the Afghans, but everyone has to get real about how to use resources effectively going forward. In terms of talking about who's made out well, major defense contractors have gotten very, very fat on these past several years. Some regional contractors as well have done extraordinarily well out of this. China's done pretty well. Inside Afghanistan, there's a small coterie of well-connected individuals who have made a heck of a lot of money on contracts with the military. In fact, I think one of the unintended, unfortunate consequences of the Obama buildup in 2009 and 10 is just the logistical needs of a larger military presence cost a whale of a lot of money and empowered certain well-placed individuals and well-placed companies to reap enormous profits. Now, I don't know at the end of the day whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. The increased troop presence certainly brought increased security to some parts of the country, which was essential. But at the same time, it actually fueled a lot of the corruption that is going to be the challenge of the next decade.